The United States has officially reached a worst-case scenario in the Middle East where everything could change. The US military received a devastating attack with a one-way drone that headed for a northern base in Jordan, resulting in 3 US casualties and over 30 more injuries. A majority of the injuries resulting in traumatic brain injury, or TBI, where these effects of the TBI will be with the soldiers and service members for the rest of their lives. However, the reason why this is a worst-case scenario is because the US military really only has 2 options. Go after the Iranian-backed militant group who did the attack, or go after the country of Iran themselves, where the United States knows Iran is funding these Iranian-backed militant groups going after the US military. And to make things even more confusing, the country of Iran is already denying any sort of allegations that have to do with these attacks on US service members. However, the country of Iran, their air defenses are now at an all-time high and are anticipating some sort of retaliation attack from the United States. So what exactly is happening right now? Because the narrative was the United States is squashing and defeating every single attack coming their way, but now all of a sudden a stray attack happening over in Jordan resulted in very devastating effects. So please stick with me in this video, because President Biden has to make an extremely crucial decision that could change the entirety of the Middle East and the mission for the United States in the Middle East. Now, before we start this, please at least like this video or comment on this video or turn on notifications. I don't do any sponsors on this channel, and I really want to educate and inform you on events happening in the Middle East, because if you've been paying attention, everyone saw this coming, and unfortunately, this actually happened. Now, as a former US soldier, this is definitely incredibly devastating news to hear. You never like to hear your brothers in arms or sisters in arms getting injured, or at the very worst, making that ultimate sacrifice. It's extremely important to remember that US service members are still on very dangerous deployment, especially right now in the Middle East where things are ramping up to an all-time high. But this attack in particular is going to be very confusing for the US military and what their response is going to be. Because ever since October 7th, which of course was when Hamas attacked Israel and the whole war started, you have to understand whenever there were attacks on any sort of US military elements, it was usually only between Syria and Iraq. And of course, in recent days, you're hearing a lot about the country of Yemen and the Houthis going after actual naval ships and other US military assets. But you almost never hear about the country of Jordan and really US military members in Jordan. Understand this, the country of Jordan is an extremely crucial asset and area for the US military to operate out of within the Middle East. Jordan is an extremely close ally to the United States, and Jordan has even admitted they need the United States in their country to not only protect Jordan, but to protect the Middle East from any sort of stray attacks or some sort of regional conflict. Also, Jordan is the last line of defense for Israel for any sort of militants to want to get into the West Bank and potentially try some sort of invasion or some sort of attack on Israel. Now, the specific attack happened on a base called Tower 22 Patrol and Operations Base. And this base, like other bases on the Jordan-Syrian border, they serve an important and crucial role. Essentially try and guard the border regions between Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, and see if there's any border hopping between militant groups, Iranian-backed militant groups, who are trying to push logistics or try to initiate an attack. But ever since October 7th, most of the attacks that were really ever happening again was between Syria and the country of Iraq. And the United States has always designated these attacks with Iranian-backed militia groups. Now, a lot of fingers and eyes are pointing towards the country of Iran, because the equipment used to take out the military members in the base of Jordan was a one-way drone. And if you know anything about these one-way drones, they mostly come from the country of Iran. One of their biggest buyers is actually Russia, and again, these drones are extremely devastating. They're very easy to use, but more important, they're very hard to track where they come from. But when you look into the type of attacks in the Middle East, especially on US military members, they tend to come from these one-way drones, which again, we know are linked to the country of Iran because they are supplying them to these militant groups. That is why you are seeing the United States say, well, these are Iranian-backed militant groups, and why there is a possible notion of there might be a full-blown attack on the country of Iran. Now, at the time of making this video, it's very hard to find a legitimate claim on who actually did this attack. Because right now, throughout the Middle East, a lot of factions like to take claim to any sort of attack. But right now, here's where the Biden administration is going to have to make a crucial call. The country of Iran has been very okay with being a little more public with their actions in the Middle East. Like, everyone knows the country of Iran is behind the Houthis, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and other military factions in Syria and Iraq. But right now, you have a group, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, who are also being a little more public in their military operations. Now, this specific unit is not really too known to be in direct operations or combat with the United States or other Western assets. They tend to be an advisory role, almost like the special forces going into a clandestine country and working with their militant groups or militia groups in hopes that they will work for the US military. This is exactly what the Revolutionary Guard is doing. Now, according to open source information, it just so happens that the Revolutionary Guard is known to be in this specific area of Syria, which is right across the border from Jordan in this northeastern border. The reason why this is relevant is because, again, you have to understand, these one-way drones, they have a specific mileage they can reach or a specific area they can reach to perform their duties as a one-way drone. And the country of Iran, again, is the #1 culprit for something like this happening, considering the country of Israel very recently struck down some Revolutionary Guard targets. So again, this is not like speculation. Even Western assets know that the Revolutionary Guard right now is very active in Syria. Again, it makes sense for Iran to be in Syria because that gets them even closer to Israel. Even though the country of Iran and the United States don't get along, ultimately speaking, the country of Iran wants and needs to take out Israel. That is like their #1 duty and target when it comes to military operations currently. Now, President Joe Biden and Lloyd Austin, his #1 general, they are already in talks and have put out a statement saying the United States is prepared for retaliation strikes at the time they deem appropriate. If you look into how the Biden administration and this current Pentagon organization has been operating recently, the United States military has been extremely patient and very tactical in how they perform their retaliation strikes or any sort of strikes. In the country of Iraq, the United States waited almost 70 times for US military members to get attacked, where finally the United States performed a retaliation attack on actual militant groups. Even looking down into the country of Yemen, it took about 2 months worth of drone attacks towards Israel, seizing actual civilian vessels, and actually going after US ships. After 2 months, the US military and the British military, they performed a shock and awe over the country of Yemen to take out Houthi targets. Now, when it comes to the attack on Jordan, I don't want to say the US military was caught off guard, but this is not in the pattern of how the US military has managed to defend themselves from other stray attacks throughout the Middle East. Ultimately speaking, we will never know what the situation was unless we were on the ground, and I want to respect the service members who are out there busting their day in and day out while I sit here and report the news to you. So eventually we will get the entirety of the story, but I do want to point out, throughout the Middle East, the United States has been able to repel a lot of attacks from these militant groups, but now for the United States to fail in the defense of these attacks, especially from just one-way drone, this is very hard for the United States to pinpoint where this drone came from and how strong of a response the United States needs to do to get the message across the entire Middle East that the United States is willing to do whatever it takes to protect US military members. Now, the United States has not notioned that they are going to strike the country of Iran, but what you do need to understand is that when the United States stood up and they said we are going to protect the country of Israel throughout this war beginning on October 7th, the United States has said if we need to, we will strike Iran if they push us far enough. Now, we are at that point where we have a loss of life. It's a little shocking to me that we waited this long for this to happen, and that now these militant groups had a successful operation, and all of a sudden we're like, well, what are we going to do about it? We're going to have a strong response. And this is why the Biden administration is going to have to be extremely careful. Again, using the Houthis in Yemen as an example, you'll notice that the United States is not really going after Houthi personnel or Iranian personnel. They're only going after logistics and like the rails used to launch missiles. But in this case, the gloves are off, and the United States once again lost service members. And again, there's really only two options. You go after the specific militant group who did this, or you go after the head of the snake, which is the country of Iran. And look, you don't have to be a professional investigator to look at the country of Iran and think, you know what, it's a little fishy that now all of a sudden we have confirmation that your air defenses are at an all-time high. That doesn't look too good. Not only that, the country of Iran has been extremely aggressive with their strikes, specifically from the country of Iran, striking the country of Pakistan, striking the country of Iraq, going after the country of Syria to attack militant groups, but to also be within the area of where the United States is operating. So look, I am not suggesting that this is a false flag, but one thing is for sure, if you've been covering the Middle East or looking into what's happening, from the multitude of attacks and the numbers of the hundreds of attacks that's been happening to U.S. military members, it is a miracle that it took this long for U.S. military members to get taken out. This is absolutely devastating, but again, I am only pointing this out with respect to the U.S. military because we are the greatest and strongest fighting force in the world. I don't know what Biden is going to do with his response. Because he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. If he goes after the country of Iran, just like that, we are literally going to be in a World War III in the Middle East where all of these militant groups will all of a sudden strike throughout the Middle East. And if the US military just goes after the militant group who did this attack, this is not going to be enough, and this will not stop these militant groups from going after more U.S. service members. It's been happening since October 7th, day in and day out, and I think a lot of us, including myself, want to see a stronger response from the U.S. military where soldiers are not compromised and they can actually defend themselves and go after these militant groups and not wait for these attacks. This is why the country of Iraq wants to kick us out of their country and why there's also talks of leaving the country of Syria. It's either the Biden administration is in a position where he's like, you know what, we just leave the region, or he's here to stay. But if we are here to stay, again, I am not suggesting we start an all-out war with the country of Iran, but we are now compromised. We are in a position where an all-out war could occur in the Middle East because no matter what the response is from the Biden administration, this is going to instigate even more responses, even more attacks. And unfortunately, we are in a position as a country where Iran has finally exploited a way to go after the United States. Use militia groups to go after the United States and totally deny that they did anything, because that is what the country of Iran is doing. However, the country of Iran might find out very soon that the United States has been watching them for a very long time, and we might unfortunately see an increase or uptick in violence. So that is a very sad thing that is going to happen in the Middle East, but unfortunately, if the U.S. military is going to stay there, the U.S. military needs to look after their own members. So we'll see what happens. For me, I wish we see peace. It's very, very sad to see fellow brothers and sisters get hurt, but this is the current situation. I really hope there's not an all-out war, but unfortunately, I think we put ourselves in that situation, and Iran is willing to take it this far and see whether or not the United States is going to retaliate.